Chapter 11. Ice Cream Crusader. Tom started chuckling like a guy at a comedy club who's had too many drinks. Roxanne couldn't understand. She has holding his arm hard. Why was he laughing? Ruby turned and started giggling too. Roxanne grasped Tom's bicep even harder, willing him to stop. She'd never seen him so giddy. As they walked to the door, Tom patted Roxanne's arm with his other hand and said, "That was so funny, dear." Other patrons shot them looks of inquiry, wondering what had been so amusing. Once the three of them exited the restaurant, Roxanne let go and Tom slowed down his obnoxious laughter. He pointed to Roxanne and said to Ruby, "She's a hoot. I'm so glad I found her," then hugged Roxanne's shoulder stiffly. They waited for the valet to retrieve their cars, an awkward silence blanketing them after their hysterical exit. Roxanne waved to Ruby as she drove off in her convertible, smiling, and entered Tom's SUV. Now that they were alone, Roxanne laid into him. "What was that all about? Why were you laughing like a hyena back there?" Tom kept his eyes on the road. "I wanted to leave the meeting on a high note. Make Ruby remember it as if we had such a good time. You could have just told a joke or something." "I don't know any jokes," he responded in a straightforward manner, as if his sudden out-of-character outburst was perfectly plausible. Even the robot had a weak spot. He was so concerned with what Ruby thought of him, he was willing to put on an act at least for a moment or two. Although it was strange seeing Tom laugh so hard, it proved to Roxanne he could be more unrestrained. Maybe he had more human attributes to uncover. Still, she was disappointed in his performance at the restaurant. "Did you like your meal?" Tom asked. "I can't believe the prices they charge." "It was good, but not that good. Next time try something new. The porterhouse is delicious." Roxanne rolled her eyes. "And maybe a glass of wine instead of hard liquor," Tom added. "I know you're paying and all, but I'm just not used to that sort of thing. I'm a burger and beer sort of gal. And what was with that dessert menu anyway? Champagne ice cream? No thanks. I'd take plain old vanilla any day." Tom smirked at that, and Roxanne felt satisfied that he at least found her struggle to fit into high society a little amusing. "By the way, I saw you got super excited when Ruby mentioned the land holdings. Why didn't you ask her about them before?" "Ruby is a refined lady." "Refined, all right. She seemed to enjoy the Chardonnay." Roxanne pretended to gulp down a beverage. "It's inappropriate to come out and ask for what you want right away in this situation. I have to ease into it." "Oh, so you mean it first requires hours of listening to her yammering on about the people she knows and the places she's been?" "Exactly," Tom said as he nodded. "I call that playing a person. You apparently call it refined." "I'm not playing her." Tom's tone sounded defensive. "I'm just finessing the deal a bit. Plus, we need time to build up the appearance of our family." "Yeah, about that," Roxanne pointed. "How can I be sure you're not just in this for business purposes? I can pretend to be your girlfriend, but I don't know about this baby thing. How do you know you'd even be good with kids?" Tom kept his eyes on the road, sitting up straight in his seat. He even drove like a computerized puppet. "Roxanne, I know it's hard for you to believe, but I want a child more than I want this land. This situation presented itself, and I want to take the opportunity while it's there." "And opportunity is not a lengthy visitor," Roxanne agreed. "You could, however, work on one thing." She squinted, not sure she should even mention it at this point. "What's that?" "You say you're not a ladies' man, but you could certainly try to lighten up a bit. Make more of an effort to put people at ease. Be less formal." "I don't do loose. It's unbecoming." Tom took one hand off the wheel and straightened his tie. "Whatever you say," Roxanne said in a defeated tone. "How about this, you lay off the alcohol so our fetus has a fertile place to grow, and I'll try to relax." "Oh, pull over here." Roxanne pointed to a small clapboard hut set back from the road. "They have the best ice cream." Tom swerved and managed to maneuver the SUV onto a crumbling driveway. Once he parked in a small lot to the side of the ice cream shop, Roxanne hopped out. Even though she was dressed in her evening attire, she didn't seem to mind, smiling at the other patrons in jeans and t-shirts. She ordered cookies and cream while Tom opted for Rocky Road as they stood on the porch with their ice cream cones. The night was more hot and humid than it had been in previous evenings, and it was hard to keep up with licking their treats before drops of ice cream slid down their cones. A few couples and two families also lingered by the porch, turning their cones to catch the ice cream before it became a melted mess. While Roxanne had never really considered herself the maternal type, she liked kids. She got a kick out of them, and watching them try to enjoy an ice cream cone on a hot night proved a cheap form of entertainment. Scanning the crowd, Roxanne noticed one little boy in particular with orange hair the color of a traffic cone, aggressively licking his chocolate ice cream. His mom held one baby on her hip, while trying to spoon-feed a toddler, so the orange-haired boy had to handle his cone on his own. "Be careful, Ricky," she said. "I can't afford to buy you another cone." The next minute, after one very forceful lick, Ricky's ice cream came toppling off the cone and onto the wooden porch. His mother, her hands tied, started to yell at the boy. Tom jumped to action with cat-like reflexes as he held his cone in one hand and swiped the mound of ice cream off of the wooden plank with his other hand, placing it back on the boy's cone as if it had never left. The boy looked at Tom, then proceeded to continue licking. Roxanne handed Tom one of her napkins. The boy's mother thanked Tom. Tom nodded in his usual way, but when Ricky tugged on his pant leg, chocolate ice cream from his hand smearing the navy blue fabric, Tom didn't seem ruffled. He squatted down so he could be face to face with Ricky. "Thanks, mister," Ricky said. "Do you want a lick?" He reached his cone up to Tom's face, accidentally hitting Tom's nose with some ice cream. Tom licked it off the best he could. "It's no problem," he said to Ricky, and they both smiled. Roxanne was so impressed with how effortlessly Tom acted with the young boy. Unlike with adults, children seemed to make Tom relax more. Once they'd finished their cones and were ambling back to the SUV, Roxanne gave Tom a little nudge with her hip. It caught Tom off guard and he stumbled a bit, then recovered. "I didn't know you were a savior of ice cream cones," she said. "It never came up," he retorted, deadpan. Roxanne smiled. "I like how you didn't just try to buy him another cone. You made him feel like it was no big deal." Tom shrugged. She'd had doubts about Tom and his true intentions. She could tell he really liked kids and for some reason, he seemed more at ease with them than with adults. Nevertheless, she thought she needed to learn more about Tom to really be sure. She had Tom drop her off at her father's. Idling in front of the small brick house, Tom turned toward Roxanne. "Thank you, Roxanne, for accompanying me. I haven't forgotten about that permit. It hasn't been as easy as I'd hoped." Roxanne didn't know exactly what that meant. She hoped Tom wasn't engaging in anything nefarious, but at the same time she really needed it. The crew was starting to prepare for the next phase of construction, and she knew she didn't have much time before Danny, or worse the loan shark, would know she hadn't filed the permit. Roxanne stared back at Tom and gave him a small grin. She waited for Tom to make a move, maybe kiss her goodnight, even if just on the cheek. Instead, he sat at the wheel of the SUV and seemed to look past Roxanne's shoulder through the passenger side window. Being that they'd barely made contact, she wasn't sure how they were going to make a baby. "By then," she said and opened the door, a little disappointed. Chapter 12. Baby Maker. Roxanne entered her dad's house to find him watching a movie, bag of popcorn in hand. "Ooh la la," her father said, watching Roxanne enter in the blue dress. "Big date." "I'm not sure." She sat down next to her dad and grabbed a handful of popcorn. Besides the fact that Tom hadn't even mentioned how or when they were going to make this baby, Roxanne just assumed it would come in time. She figured he was getting to know her first before he made a romantic move. From what she knew, the baby-making part was supposed to be something men normally enjoyed, and she couldn't understand what Tom's plan was or even if he was remotely attracted to her. "Who was the date with?" "The guy from the bar," her dad asked. "I'm not sure it was a date, but yes, bar guy." "What's he like?" He's different. He likes cats." "Cats are okay," her father nodded. "Yeah, I guess. We've never had a cat." At the same time, Roxanne had to confront the reality of becoming a mom. When she agreed to Tom's deal, she was insistent that she couldn't walk away. Yet, becoming a mother had been a secondary thought after protecting her dad. The fact that her father seemed eager to have grandkids was at least a positive sign. Like she told Tom, babies were a big deal. "How did you do it, Dad, after Mom left?" "Do what?" "Raise such an excellent human being," she said and smiled at him. He put his arm around her and gave her a squeeze. "I'm not quite sure. It was certainly hard. I just took you everywhere with me because after your mom left, I didn't want you to ever think I would leave you too." Roxanne smiled and slunk down on the couch into her father's chest. She couldn't lose him. At work, Roxanne continued to put off her boss when he asked about the permit. Tom promised to help and she hoped he'd come through. Otherwise the baby-making deal would be off. About a week after their dinner with the heiress, Tom again texted Roxanne that he'd pick her up. "Where are we going?" Roxanne asked as she climbed in Tom's SUV, squinting from the bright afternoon sun. "We need to start the process for this baby," he said. Roxanne responded. She didn't really know what he meant, but she hoped it was something fun. Maybe they'd be able to start connecting because at that point, she wasn't sure how she'd ever be able to be intimate with Tom unless he showed her at least a little affection. She really didn't think she could have sex with a robot. First, what's up with the permit? What's going on with your connections? She asked. They're handling it. No way. It's taking too long.
No permit.
No, baby. She crossed her arms. What do you want from me? I want you to be more hands-on. I can't just sit back and wait. How do I know they're even doing anything? Trust me, Roxanne, he said. My people know how to get things done. Still, she wasn't sure she should trust him. Maybe she should ask for an agreement in writing? Owen had passed on another warning from the loan shark the night before, meaning they knew that construction was being delayed. She had to get things moving fast, or else. Tom pulled up to a newer development of offices off a tree-lined suburban street, a block or two from the main highway. Inside, the waiting room included minimalist decor with comfy leather seating. Roxanne noticed pictures of babies plastered on the wall. Realizing it was a doctor's office, Roxanne figured Tom wanted both of them to get checked out to make sure everything was working properly. Tom spoke to the receptionist, who immediately led them to an office where a woman in a pink lab coat reached out her hand to greet them. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes.
I'm Dr. Lane.
I understand you're having trouble conceiving. Tom nodded as Roxanne looked at him a bit perplexed. So based on these medical reports you provided, I think we can go ahead and do the insemination, the doctor continued, and Roxanne raised her eyebrows. Because you insisted on such discretion, I'll just need you to sign some paperwork here and the nurse will get you started. She smiled and handed Tom a clipboard. Annoyed that once again Tom had not prepared her, Roxanne gripped the side of her chair tightly. Besides the fact that he lied and fabricated some type of medical history for her, he hadn't informed her of the doctor visit. On top of all that, the plan to use insemination meant for sure Tom wasn't romantically interested in her at all. Tom started to fill out the forms, signing and initialing in all the needed places. His coldness as he robotically handed her the clipboard infuriated Roxanne, and she bit her lower lip to keep from snapping at him. She started scribbling her new name Roxanne Rhodes, next to those places with Tom's signature. Humiliated that she actually thought the reason Tom had chosen her was because he was at least a little attracted to her caused tears to well in her eyes. Dr. Lane noticed Roxanne's face and tried to console her. This happens all the time. Don't be too hard on yourself. Just because you couldn't have a baby the old-fashioned way doesn't make you less of a woman or a mother. We'll make sure you have a healthy baby, she said and smiled. Roxanne nodded, wiping her eyes. The doctor had mistaken her tears for something else, but she was right about one thing. It wasn't the way Roxanne had always pictured creating her first child. Tom and Roxanne followed the doctor to an exam room where she explained the procedure. She also warned that it didn't always work the first time around, but with multiple attempts she was pretty sure Tom and Roxanne could become pregnant. Before Roxanne had time to berate Tom for the insensitive way he was handling the situation, a nurse came in and handed a hospital gown to Roxanne and a small clear cup to Tom. Tom inspected the cup, taking off its cap and looking inside the cup. You can go in there together, the nurse pointed toward a door to a bathroom, or he can go alone. Whichever you choose. Definitely alone, Roxanne said. Tom walked in, still eyeing the cup. Roxanne undressed and put on the robe, which mostly covered her body, and sat on the examen table. Several minutes went by. Roxanne tried not to envision Tom performing his fatherly duties. She perused a magazine, checked her phone, then walked up to the door of the bathroom and listened. She couldn't hear anything. Everything okay in there? She asked. She didn't hear a reply, so she sidled back to the exam table. The nurse came in to check, and Roxanne shook her head. Almost 20 minutes later Tom emerged. Quick, he said. Get the nurse. She said we couldn't wait long. So those are your swimmers. Roxanne jumped off the exam table and circled Tom, who almost looked like a statue, holding a cup with his sperm inside. I don't want to drop it. Hurry, he said. Not so fast, Roxanne replied. She knew she had him in a tough position. She had never seen him as flummoxed as in that moment. I know you made up some medical history. You bring me here, don't warn me what's going to happen, and now you look as uncomfortable with your own sperm as you do with women. Really, Roxanne? People know who I am. I can't walk out there with this cup. What if someone sees me? Get the nurse. Roxanne said, scratching her chin with her finger. I think you need to learn a little lesson first. She could tell she was making Tom even more uncomfortable, and she was starting to enjoy watching Tom squirm with his sperm. She walked by Tom's side and jostled his elbow a little, causing Tom to brace and steady the cup with his other hand. Roxanne laughed. All this work. I don't want to lose it. Will you just tell them we're ready? Oh, ready to make a baby? She asked sarcastically. I actually thought that maybe we were going to do this the old-fashioned way. Not that I wanted to. She held up her hand to clarify. But I would have been willing per our agreement. She leaned over Tom's arm. Since it's just business, you know. I want to get a good look at what's going inside me. She could tell by the way he sighed and turned his face that he was annoyed, embarrassed even. Just get the nurse, he said through clenched teeth. His feet looked bonded to the floor as he stood sturdy and erect, holding his sperm. Roxanne continued to look at the little cup in Tom's hand, standing on her tiptoes to get a better view. So when she fell forward a little and grabbed Tom's arm to steady her, she didn't expect it to plunge toward the floor. Chapter 13 on cue. The cup bobbled in Tom's hands as he lost his grip and then tried to stop the cup from tumbling. Roxanne shrieked as she saw the sample careening downward. Tom squatted quickly, trying to grab the cup before it hit the floor. His cat-like reflexes, again, proved useful as he was able to sweat the cup and catch it before it inevitably spilled. Roxanne and Tom both sighed in relief, and Roxanne called for the nurse to come, leaving Tom standing in another statuesque position with the cup in hand. The nurse arrived to take the sample and prepare it for insemination. Once she left and Roxanne sat on the table, Tom turned toward the door, a look of disdain on his face. I'm sorry, Roxanne said in an almost whisper. I'll give you some privacy, Tom said and looked down at the floor. I'll order a car to take you home. I know I messed up, but you know what bothers me most? Roxanne said, looking at Tom's back, retreating to the door. I thought this was at least some kind of partnership, you and I. I thought you at least trusted me. It seems like you make all the decisions alone. Tom stopped, and before he grabbed the doorknob he twisted his head absurdly far and looked at Roxanne. Without saying anything, he turned his head back, opened the door and walked out. Roxanne laid on the exam table and tried to hold back her tears. The insemination part happened fairly quickly. Afterward, the nurse provided Roxanne with some instructions and a pamphlet. Roxanne's playfulness had almost gotten her in trouble with Tom. Nonetheless, she still longed to find a way to loosen him up a bit. Even though he would have felt uncomfortable, it stung that he made her endure the insemination alone. She reasoned that if Tom continued to keep secrets from her, she'd just have to create some secrets on her own. She directed the car Tom sent to take her to the hole in the wall. It had been a while since she'd visited the building Owen had sent her to, and she still couldn't put the pieces together. Unlike the night she came to the bar with Tom, she didn't waste any time and entered the secret office via the broken stall in the men's bathroom first thing. Like usual, Owen was staring at something on his desk. I see you found some shoes, said Owen as Roxanne looked down at her brown boots. I found my shoes but little else. Why did you send me to that address? I still don't have the permit, and as far as I can see, I'm no closer to getting it. I didn't say you'd find it there. Owen didn't look up from the paper on his desk. Roxanne put her hands on her hips. But what was the clue? I'm running out of time. Construction is about to start, and you know I can't be the cause of any delays or the loan shark will have my father's neck. How's the stiff? Owen finally took off his glasses and squinted toward Roxanne. Roxanne looked confused. Why would he want to know about Tom? You mean the guy I was here with the other night? Yes. What does he have to do with this? You tell me. Owen crossed his arms and leaned back. Nothing. Owen shook his head and smiled and made a tsk sound. Then he looked back down at his desk. Roxanne, I thought you knew better than that. You want information, you have to provide information. Don't lie to me. Okay, she said, shoving her hands in her pockets. She thought about the visit to the fertility clinic. She couldn't tell Owen the truth about her deal with Tom, even though she knew she could trust Owen. It was just too personal. He's helping me. He said he could help me find out who stole the permit. She took her hands out of her pockets and raised her arms. But only because that burnt-out building you sent me to was a dead end. Owen chuckled a little and nodded. You didn't see what you needed to see then, he said. Just this. Roxanne brandished the piece of aluminum with the clover leaf from her wallet and pushed it onto Owen's desk. He picked it up and examined it as if it were a priceless diamond. Then he placed it on the desk and made a waving gesture with his hand, indicating Roxanne should take it before returning his gaze to the document in front of him. I can't find out who stole the permit. You can use your man for that, but I can buy you some time with the loan shark. Not much though, he knows something's up. Roxanne put the aluminum piece back in her wallet. Thank you, she said and backed out of the office. She walked to the bar and sat down. What'll you have? The bartender asked. Just a seltzer water with lime, she said, remembering the nurse's advice. Despite the insemination, she didn't feel any different. Before going to the clinic, she had mostly thought about Tom and what kind of parent he would be, but hadn't really considered what kind of parent she would embody. Now, with the possibility that a life was growing inside her at that moment, she felt uneasy. She looked around at the patrons. One construction guy she knew raised his beer bottle in a hello gesture. She gave him a small wave. The fact that she might be pregnant scared her. She sipped her seltzer before walking over to the pool table and racking the balls. She thought the game would distract her from the serious business of loan sharks, building permits, babies and Tom. She chalked her cue and broke the balls. Hitting the 2-ball in the corner pocket, she lined up another shot and thought about becoming a mother. She liked kids, however. She knew having her own would be different. It was certainly a shock when Tom asked her about the deal, but one of the reasons she agreed was because she had wanted to be a mother someday. More importantly, she wanted to save her father. She continued to hit balls into their pockets, only missing a few shots. When she finished, she racked them up again. Playing billiards helped her think, and now that Owen was going to buy her some time, she could relax a little. As she hit the 3-ball into the side pocket, she thought about Tom again. He'd made their deal feel so transactional. Next time she saw him, she vowed to confront him about his coldness, which he mistook for sophistication. She certainly didn't want to raise a spoiled kid. And while she didn't mind exposing a child to cultured things, she needed assurances that she would have some say in how their child was brought up. She planned to keep working. Tom would get the best nanny they could find. And besides, wouldn't this child get the best of both worlds? A down-to-earth family that could teach them important life skills and the luxury of the best goods and services money could buy? She dreamed of teaching a little protege how to hammer in a nail. Like her dad did, she would teach her child useful skills. After she sunk the 5-ball, she queued up her next shot. Hearing the front door open, she looked over and seeing the person she least expected standing there. She missed the cue ball and almost scratched the table. Tom glanced around the room, clearly uncomfortable standing in the bar alone. Unlike at the fertility clinic where he'd caught her off guard, she had the upper hand being on more familiar turf. She knew she'd made a mistake, teasing him at the clinic, but his coldness left her incensed.
Chapitre 14, hidden danger.
After scanning the room for a minute, Tom noticed Roxanne at the pool table and hulked over to her. Annoyed that she'd missed the cue ball, Roxanne ignored his stare and continued to line up her shot, sinking the 9-ball in the side pocket. "I thought about what you said," Tom said while standing behind her. "What part?" Roxanne asked as she sunk another shot. "About how I don't trust you. I don't include you." Roxanne walked around the table, eyeing the balls, chalking her cue. She leaned over the table for a hard-to-reach shot, which she missed. "Ahoo." Roxanne walked over to the corner and lined up her stick for another shot. "And I want to change that." "Okay." Roxanne sunk another shot, but when she walked past Tom, he grabbed her cue and forced her to make eye contact. "I have somewhere to go. Will you come?" he asked. Is this another refined outing or maybe an impromptu doctor's visit? Either way, the answer is no. She tried to step around him, but he blocked her. "Come on, Roxanne. It's a building site. You have to see for yourself." She shrugged. She looked at the table, noticing the 8-ball trapped in front of the 7-ball in a difficult-to-bank shot. "Sink the 8-ball, I come with you," she said and handed him the pool cue. "Miss, and I don't." Being the refined type, Roxanne was pretty sure Tom didn't have a lot of experience hanging out in bars and pool halls. Therefore, she was fairly confident he'd miss, and they'd both go home so she could sulk in private. Tom gave her a look of disgust and eyed the table. He walked around the pockets and looked at the ball's positioning. When he lined up and shot to bank the 8-ball off the opposite wall, Roxanne thought for sure he'd miss. Tom leaned over the table, the rigidness gone from his back, giving way to a graceful arc where he smoothly glided the pool cue through his long, nimble fingers. He tilted his head and let his mouth relax, as he knocked the cue ball into the cushions where it came careening back to tap the 8-ball into the pocket. Once he was sure the shot was sunk, he stood up stiff and straight, and handed the cue back to Roxanne. Then he offered her his arm and said, "Good, now let's go." She curled her arm around his as they exited the bar. Roxanne was impressed, not only with Tom's superior billiard skill, but also with his willingness to apologize. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Roxanne asked. "Must there be no secrets with you?" She shrugged. "I may not play billiards in bars or pool halls, but remember my parents are rich. We had a billiard room of our own, and my old tutor was quite the teacher." Tom smiled at the memory. Of course, Roxanne thought. How did she not think of that sooner? Tom drove to the outskirts of the city, near the airport. I want you to see this building that's coming up for sale. The owners are supposedly taking bids next week. I want your expertise to see what I can do with it, Tom said. Roxanne sighed. It was certainly a step in the right direction that Tom was including her in some of his plans. Yet, she couldn't help be disappointed that he treated her like a business associate instead of a girlfriend. They pulled up on a shadowy block of office and manufacturing buildings. The five-story building Tom pointed out to Roxanne had been a factory and warehouse for paper products. He was thinking of developing it into a space to hold special events with apartments above. He claimed lots of urban professionals would pay top dollar for an industrial loft above a chic wedding hall below. Roxanne looked at the site and was impressed with Tom's vision. He pointed out how he could adjust the entrance and windows, designating where he'd put a sign, and even described a logo. During his descriptions, his face looked excited and animated. Talking about building and development made Tom show his emotions, as his head and arms appeared less robotic. Craving to hear more, Roxanne could tell that real estate development was more than just a job for Tom. It was the passion that fueled his human side. They started to walk around to the back of the building, check out the loading bays, when they heard a group of people talking and could smell something burning. The back of the building faced an open lot, and was therefore pretty hidden. Instinctively, they crouched down so they wouldn't be seen. While they couldn't tell exactly what was going on, they could make out several figures in hard hats. From their vantage point, it was hard to make out faces. Roxanne wondered if she knew any of the guys. There were plenty of construction crews in Memphis, yet they all tended to run in the same circles. At one point, they could see flames jump from one of the loading dock areas, and Tom protectively put his arm in front of Roxanne to shield her. He held his finger in front of his lips to indicate she should remain silent. In their crouched position, they could see something burning, they just didn't know what. Tom led them back around the front where they hopped in his SUV and sped off. What was that all about? Roxanne asked. Tom looked concerned, angry even. I'm not sure, he said. That building is supposed to up for sale soon. No one should be burning anything in there. It was so odd. Even if they were welding or something, construction guys don't work at night. What's going on? I need to look into this further, Tom said, and Roxanne nodded, thinking that Tom would send his guys out to uncover the mystery. Then he turned to her. Let's make this our secret. Tomorrow night, just you and me. Wear dark clothes and dress warm. It could be a long night. Roxanne couldn't wait. Chapter 15, Taking Aim. The next evening, Tom picked Roxanne up in a pickup truck. I see I'm not the only one who can do disguises, she said to Tom, as she hoisted herself in the passenger seat. I use this from time to time. I don't want anyone to notice the other car. Sure, Roxanne said, offering Tom a piece of gum from her bag. Tom waved his hand, indicating he didn't want a piece. I find it a disgusting habit, chomping away. Tom gnashed his teeth together, imitating an annoying gum chewer. Roxanne rolled her eyes. I'll just chew mine daintily, she said. At least it's better than smoking. Anyway, I do it when I'm nervous. They arrived at a vacant lot a half-mile from the back of building they were checking out. Tom parked the truck at the bottom of a hill, and they walked toward the top in order to see the building from their far-removed spot. The dark lot felt quiet and desolate. When Roxanne was almost to the top of the hill, Tom noticed a light flicker by the building, and he pulled Roxanne down to the ground. They slithered up the remaining yards until they could see some figures in the darkness gathered by one of the loading bays. Tom looked through a pair of binoculars he brought, while Roxanne blew a bubble with her gum. Must you? He said, still looking in the binoculars. Sorry, she whispered. She enjoyed the excitement. Her heart fluttered, and she wasn't sure if it was because of the danger involved in what they were doing or her proximity to Tom. Next to him on the ground, she could smell his cologne, like a sea breeze, cool and smooth. She watched his jerky movements, adjusting the binoculars. She knew he couldn't see her admiring him. His long body splayed on the ground in his black pants and shirt that highlighted his fit and trim figure. He pointed to something and she scanned the building, peering to see what Tom was pointing at. Here, he said, handing her the binoculars. They're definitely burning something inside. She grabbed them and held them to her eyes, chewing her gum. She could make out several forms, construction guys she didn't recognize, and she could see the flames even though she couldn't make out the contents. Without thinking, Roxanne blew another bubble and squinted in the binoculars some more, panning them to the other side of the building where two men stood, talking. Once she could make out one of the men, she dropped the binoculars and her bubble burst. Sure, Tom said. Do you want them to see us? He asked. Roxanne licked the gum from her lips and then spit it on the ground. She turned toward Tom, her face scared. I know one of those men, she said. A whipping breeze blew by and Roxanne shivered. Tom looked at her concerned. She looked like the face of the moon in the darkness, pale and white. Who? He asked. It's Baxter, she said, almost not believing it. Tom took the binoculars and examined the men. Which one? The one in the yellow hard hat. The other guy has a white one. Tom continued to look as Roxanne sat up. Seeing Baxter, she just froze. Thinking about what happened between them made her feel nauseous. She remembered their last encounter, his advances, her rejection. She leaned her head on Tom's shoulder. What's wrong? He asked, stroking her hair. He's the county official who signed my permit. She continued to stare straight ahead, unable to focus on anything in particular. So, he asked. Well, let's just say he wanted something in return. When I didn't give it to him, I ran off. Okay. Tom dropped the binoculars and wrapped Roxanne in his arms. It's okay. You're here with me. I'll protect you. But what's he doing there and at night? She said in disgust. I'm pretty sure he's involved in some shady business. Tom could feel Roxanne continuing to shiver. He rubbed her shoulder and arm with his hand to warm her. Look, we're not going to find out exactly what's going on there, he said. Now we know Baxter is behind it. I can look into some things, find some more out later. He tried to console her, hugging her tighter. She nestled her head in his chest. What is it that you like to do that will make you feel better? Shoot something, she said in a girlish voice. Like pool or? He asked. No, like a gun. Oh well, I think we might need to tone that down a little. I mean, we're not sure exactly what Baxter. Not people. Targets, she said and turned her gaze up toward Tom's face. They crawled down the hill a ways before walking back to the truck. Once they were sure they wouldn't be seen, Roxanne instructed Tom to drive to her father's place, where she picked up some empty beer cans, a handgun, and a BB gun that looked like a rifle, along with some ammunition. Luckily, her father wasn't home, probably enjoying a beer at the bar. She hopped in Tom's truck and they roared away. She directed him to a deserted field in front of a forested area. He parked and they trudged back behind the tree line. After about 500 yards, they came to a slight clearing with the remnants of a crumbled stone wall. Roxanne set up 4 cans in a row, then aimed the small black pistol, shooting each can in rapid succession. Tom stood behind her, impressed at her aim. Next, she set the cans up and loaded the BB gun. Have you ever shot before? She asked, adding, I know some rich folks like to hunt. Tom shook his head. My family wasn't into that. Here, let me show you. She handed Tom the gun. She first showed him some safety features and told him never to point it at anything until he was ready to shoot. Then she taught him how to look down the barrel, eyeing the target. As she leaned over him, his closeness heated her chest. With the gun bolstered by his shoulder, he fired 5 shots, all missing the can. Like I told you before, I have bad aim. He held the gun by his side. Roxanne took it and reloaded it before handing it back to him. You just need practice. Roxanne stood behind him, reaching around to help him steady the gun. Now just take a deep breath. Bend your knees a little. Don't be so stiff. Tom tried to loosen himself, but looked more like a bobbing duck. He took another shot and missed. Pretend it's a pool cue, she said. Let your finger glide on the trigger rather than press so abruptly. Lean your body into the gun. She could see Tom slump a little and focus his eye. His next shot hit the center of the can. He stood up, a smile beaming on his face. Roxanne smiled too and patted him on the back. That felt good, he said. Can I try it again? Here, try this. She handed him the handgun. He raised his hands, adjusted his stance and aimed. When he made his first shot, Roxanne jumped and clapped. He pulled the trigger for his next 5 shots in rapid succession, each hitting the can, which was now splintered. He handed the gun back to Roxanne, his big grin thawing the chill she felt after seeing Baxter. She unloaded the guns and sat on a log looking into the trees. Tom sat down next to her. Thanks for coming. I think that helped. I needed to feel empowered, she told him. You know I like the quiet evening. This is a nice place, he said, looking at the moon above the trees. She looked up too. While she craned her neck, Tom brought his gaze down, staring into Roxanne's eyes. She stared back. He reached his hand up to cradle her cheek and bent his head for a kiss. Roxanne lifted her lips and their mouths met. Tom's kiss was anything but mechanical. His lips felt supple, and his hand on her cheek cradled her head tenderly. She practically melted into his chest, feeling his body contour to her own. It was their first kiss, and it heated her insides. Now let's have a baby, she joked. Chapter 16 Forged. After their kiss, Tom took Roxanne home and she hadn't seen him in a few days, but he'd texted her. He told her he was busy and would see her soon. She figured Tom's connections were working on finding more information about Baxter's involvement, and she was glad for that too. She didn't want to have to think about Baxter any more than she had to. It had been about 2 weeks after Tom and Roxanne's trip to the doctor. Just enough time to see if they were successful. Nervous but also excited, Roxanne wondered if it had worked. Would Tom still keep his end of the deal and help her if she wasn't pregnant? She invited Tom over for dinner, telling him she didn't want to get the pregnancy results alone. When he arrived, he handed her a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling apple cider. Walking in, he could see a small but orderly living room and an even smaller kitchen. He was surprised to see a box of pepperoni pizza and a 2-liter bottle of soda on the kitchen counter. When you said dinner, I thought you meant a homemade meal. I don't cook, said Roxanne and handed him a slice of pizza on a paper plate. Tom looked a little disdainful at the plate. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot my manners. Would you like to sit down? She led him to a small kitchen table in the corner with 2 chairs. I usually just eat on the couch, she said. They sat down eating their pizza, Tom looking stiff and straight in his chair. They ate in relative silence, only exchanging pleasantries as Roxanne poured them each a soda in a plastic cup. Roxanne noticed how Tom brought the pizza up to his mouth in a jerky motion each time, opening his mouth mechanically and chewing in a succinct rhythm. At first it didn't bother her much. She thought she must be getting used to his stoic ways. Neither of them mentioned their kiss. In her apartment, she wanted Tom to feel comfortable, but she worried that if the pregnancy test proved negative, Tom would be disappointed and look for someone else to make his dreams of being a dad come true. After a few minutes, Roxanne stopped eating and watched Tom, his movements heightening her anxiety about the pregnancy. She pushed her chair back from the table, bubbling inside from the pressure she felt. Let's just get this over with, she said. I can't take the waiting. Tom looked at her mid-bite, food sitting in his mouth. His stillness bothered her more than his mechanical eating style. She fled to the bathroom, leaving Tom perplexed at the table. He gulped down his last bite of pizza and followed Roxanne. In the bathroom, she started ripping open the rectangular box, and then the package containing the pregnancy predictor she had bought earlier that day. Roxanne held it in her hand and took a deep breath. Wait out there, she told Tom. Like other parts of the apartment, the bathroom was minuscule too. Okay, I'll just wait, he stammered. Just go, he said and shut the door. Tom turned toward the living room, feeling useless. Roxanne peed on the stick, then brought it to the sink, placing it on the sink's edge. She looked in the mirror and bit her lower lip. She couldn't stand the anticipation alone. Tom, she called. Come back. He retreated to the bathroom, having just reached the couch and turned the doorknob. When he saw the stick on the side of the sink, he looked at it as if it were a contagious disease he needed to stay away from and pointed. What did it say? I don't know yet, said Roxanne. We have to wait. She grabbed Tom's hand and pulled him out of the bathroom, unable to make up her mind in her nervous state. Let's wait in the living room, she said, clearly not wanting to stare at the pea-soaked stick any longer. Tom sat down with his arm draping the back of the couch. Roxanne slunk down next to him, nestled in his chest. They rested there silently, Roxanne checking the clock. After 3 minutes, she scampered to the bathroom. When she came back holding the stick, Tom sat up straighter, pulling his back away from the couch. Roxanne shook her head. Tom stood up and hugged her, wrapping his arms around her back. His embrace comforted her, but she was still worried. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I did everything they said and... She started to cry. Sure, Tom said and continued to hold her. They stood together for another minute or two, then sat back on the couch. He held her for what seemed like hours, Tom's body like a cozy blanket wrapped around her body. When she fell asleep in his arms, he laid her on the couch and draped his coat over her, leaving her a note to call him if she needed anything. In the morning, Roxanne felt foolish but also disappointed. The last couple weeks had taken their toll on her emotionally. She worried that Tom would renege on their deal, and then she'd be even worse off with no permit and no way to ensure the loan shark got his money. At work, she sat behind her desk inspecting the recent blueprints when Danny knocked and entered her trailer. Roxanne, I checked with the county office. They don't have the permit on file for that expansion. I thought you said you got that from Baxter. Yeah. Roxanne tried to wave him away. They probably just misplaced it or something. You know, that office does that from time to time. I'll follow up on it. She shrugged as if it were no big deal. Danny looked a little concerned, but Roxanne had never given him any reason not to trust her. Okay, well, just make sure it gets finalized. We need to get the digging done for that so we can continue with the beams. I know. Roxanne smiled and waved her hand. Trust me. I know how important it is. It would set us back a ton without it. We'd have to redraft, maybe even dig up some foundation. It'd be a mess, and I don't know if we'd have the funds to do all that. It'd be costly. She stood up from her desk and looked Danny in the eye. I'll handle it, she said. Danny nodded and left, the door slamming behind him. Roxanne started to pace around the stuffy trailer. She'd put it off for too long. Her mind raced with possibilities. She couldn't go back to Baxter. The thought of facing him again made her sick. She thought Tom would have been faster at helping her find out who the permit-stealing culprit was. Because she wasn't pregnant, she didn't have any leverage to force him or his connections to work faster. Owen was already helping her hold off the loan shark, and she still couldn't figure out his clue. Roxanne thought about going to the county office and trying to get someone else to sign off on the permit, but there was a chance another official would refuse to let her building project expand its property line. Then she'd really be in a predicament, and her father could face the wrath of the loan shark. The afternoon with Baxter flashed through her mind. Who would steal the permit? She kept asking herself. Then she thought about how Baxter didn't know it was stolen. For all he knew, she'd filed it weeks ago. She could forge his signature on a new document and file the plans. She smiled at the idea and began to slow down her pacing. She dug in her file drawer and pulled out an old permit Baxter had signed off on. Then she practiced writing Baxter's name several times on a blank sheet of paper. Next, she printed out a new copy of the permit that had been stolen. Finally, she took a deep breath and signed Baxter's name. When she held up the paper next to one of the old permits with Baxter's signature, she smiled. It looked pretty good. No one would look at it that closely anyway, she was sure. She grabbed her bag along with the permit and the blueprints and headed to the county offices before they closed. She thought it was crazy that she hadn't thought about the idea before. Of course it was illegal, but at that point she was willing to risk it, especially for her father's safety. She could tell Owen he didn't need to stall the loan shark anymore. And if the permit was accepted and the building moved along as slated, she'd have no reason to have Tom's baby. She wasn't even sure she'd be able to get pregnant anyway. She pulled up to the permit office and hesitated. What if Tom didn't want to see her anymore if she didn't need him? Was their deal the only thing keeping them together? Roxanne reflected on how comfortable he was becoming around her. Would submitting the permit ruin it all? She got out of her car and slammed the door, walking inside the building. First, she had to save her father, then she tried to save her relationship with Tom. Chapter 17, The Stiff. Later that evening when Roxanne was back at her apartment, she received a call from her dad. Roxanne, listen. I don't know how to tell you this, but Owen died. She sat on the couch in disbelief. Died? She instinctively said. Yeah, I don't know. Stroke or something. Look, there's a memorial service in 2 days. We're all going to meet afterward at the hole in the wall. Want to come? Sure, I'll be there. The news about Owen knocked Roxanne's euphoria out of her system. Owen, dead, she thought. While her dad tried to sound nonchalant about it, Roxanne could hear the cracking in his voice, proving Owen's death upset him. Roxanne took the piece of aluminum out of her wallet and stroked the shiny green clover leaf with her finger. Maybe he just sent her there for luck. With Owen gone, she felt a little more vulnerable. He'd helped her in his own ways, and now she'd need to watch her back. Despite filing the permit with Baxter's forged signature, she still wanted to know who stole the original. Like Owen told her, it could be someone wanting to sabotage her. She went to the kitchen and grabbed an ice cream sandwich out of the refrigerator. Licking the creamy vanilla ice cream from between the brown rectangles, she sat on the couch and lamented not being pregnant. At first, she had been worried about Tom reneging on their deal, but after learning about Owen's death, she started to ponder how precious family can be. She contemplated her next move and texted Tom to let him know about Owen. She didn't mention anything about the permit. She decided that would be her secret. He sounded concerned, but as far as she knew, he'd never met Owen. The memorial service was held at St. Anne's, a local Catholic church in Memphis with a large number of Irish parishioners. It was the second time in recent weeks that Roxanne and Tom were both dressed in black, however, for a different purpose. Sitting in a wooden pew near the middle of the church, Tom held Roxanne's hand as they listened to the sermon, and then the casket was closed. Roxanne could hear weeping, mostly from Owen's sister, but she could see tears in some of the eyes of the hole-in-the-wall's regulars. Angie, the waitress, blubbered in a front pew, calling Owen the best boss she'd ever had. Colored light flickered through the stained glass windows. Roxanne squeezed her father's hand as he sat on the other side of her. His eyes turned glassy at the mention of Owen's buddies, how the bar was like a second home to him. Most of the people there knew Owen from the hole in the wall. However, Roxanne noticed a couple of men in the back of the church in dark suits. She'd never seen them before and wondered what their connection to Owen might be. Once back at the bar, Roxanne wondered what would become of the place. It had been her father's main hangout for as long as she could remember. Without any family, save a sister, Roxanne couldn't imagine who would take over the hole in the wall. Tom ordered his usual glass of white wine, while Roxanne's dad ordered 2 pints of a dark Irish beer to toast Owen. Roxanne and her dad clinked their mugs together and took a drink. Tom sat motionless. He'd supported Roxanne at the service, holding her hand, putting his hand on her shoulder. But it had been a Catholic mass with all its rote motions of standing, sitting, kneeling where Tom's stiffness had gone unnoticed. There at the bar he looked out of place again. He sat unbending on the bar stool like a candle in a birthday cake. Like the flame, only his head seemed to flicker with life while the rest of his body remained rigid. "So Tom, what's your interest in my daughter?" Roxanne's dad asked. "Dad," Roxanne said, making a face at him. "I see you're being a gentleman. What kind of work you in?" her dad asked. "I'm in real estate," Tom answered, barely averting his gaze from staring at the back of the bar. Roxanne gave him a little punch in the shoulder to try to lighten him up. "Yeah, he's been involved in several projects. His family built that big commercial office building downtown." "So what do you like to do?" her father asked. Tom looked at Roxanne, clearly uncomfortable with her father's questions. "I like real estate," he said. "And pool," Roxanne jumped in. "Why don't you rack him up, Dad? Tom can show you what he can do." She wanted to prove to her dad that Tom was more than a stiff corpse on a bar stool. Tom certainly wasn't giving her much to work with. She thought a game of pool might loosen him up, demonstrate how he could be social. I don't feel like it today, honey. Why don't you two enjoy your drinks? I'm going to go talk to my buddies over there." Her father got up from his spot at the bar. "Take care of her, Tom," he said in his usual jovial way. Then he stepped a little closer and said in a softer but more menacing tone, "Or else." Roxanne heard her father's warning and laughed nervously, patting Tom on the shoulder as if what her father said was all a big joke. Tom sat stone-faced. "What's up with you?" she asked. "You're being a little more inflexible than usual." "That's my dad. The least you could do is try to engage in a conversation." "Can we go outside to the patio?" he asked. He looked around. There were quite a few people in the bar, and Roxanne could tell he felt uncomfortable with the loud crowd. "Sure," Roxanne said, and they ambled down the hallway to the patio. Outside there were people too, but they managed to find a quiet corner near where they'd first spied the cat. "What's up?" Roxanne asked. "I mean, I don't need my dad to like you, but I at least want him to respect you. Your performance back there was abysmal. You couldn't come up with any interests? I mean, really, Tom." She looked up at him, but Tom was looking at his feet. "I know. It was rude of me. I could send him a case of that beer he likes. Would that help?" "Tom," Roxanne was getting more annoyed with him. "You can't just buy your way out of everything." He grabbed both her hands and held them in his, then he looked in her eyes. "Believe me, I know." Roxanne felt his sincerity, but she still wasn't sure why he had been so formal with her father, why he felt a little more reserved that day. "So?" she asked. "It's hard for me to tell you my feelings." "Try me." "When you told me about Owen's death, even though I didn't really know him, I felt the loss. I guess I later realized it was because I just really wanted to have a child. I tried to comfort you, but I feel the pain too." "Tom," he looked at her, a little unsure how she was going to react, and his hands tensed around her fingers. "I feel that too. I'm so glad you trusted me enough to tell me how you really feel." She jumped up a little on her tiptoes and hugged him. Tom, reassured that Roxanne accepted him, hugged her back. Then he kissed her hard on the lips, his relief fueling a burning desire between them. "You don't have to hide things from me." She brushed back a piece of hair from his face. "I want to know more about you." Tom smiled, his grin making her blush. "Good. I know just where to take you then." Chapter 18, Coffee Capture. When she heard a knock at the door, Roxanne quickly applied another coat of lipstick and smacked her lips. Even though she grew up on construction sites, Roxanne had a girly side. That night, she was excited to see Tom and wanted to look sexy. After their heart-to-heart at the bar, they found a table and talked about their favorite movies. It was one of the first times they were able to leave the heavy conversations about loan sharks, stolen permits, or babies to rest. Instead, they found common ground with their enthusiasm for psychological thrillers. Tom told Roxanne he'd pick her up the next day to take her to a special place he wanted to show her. Because she made him promise it wasn't a fancy restaurant or doctor's office, she was eager to see what he had in store. At the door, Tom kissed her cheek and told her she looked cute. Then he handed her a blindfold and told her she'd have to put it on once they got closer. A few weeks ago she would have balked. Now she trusted Tom enough to participate in his game. He drove through the city to a place on the city's edge where he told her to put the blindfold on. He drove a little further then parked. Helping her out of the car, he grabbed her hand and led her to a sidewalk. Once he positioned her, he took off the blindfold. In front of her stood a small block of stores with apartments above. The building was made of a classic red brick and white trip that looked clean and modern with a hometown feel. The awnings, in a burnished copper color, reminded her of traditional urban store fronts, and quaint flower boxes with vibrant blossoms lined the apartment windows. She looked confused, staring at the scene that almost looked like a movie set. "What's this?" she said. "This was my first solo project." "Oh," Roxanne smiled, understanding why Tom brought her there. "You didn't seem to know what to tell your dad the other day, about my projects. Those buildings downtown, that's my parents. This is me." He reached out his arms to indicate the buildings. "I love it," Roxanne said. "Not what I thought your style would be, but definitely neat. It looks traditional, which is how I wanted it, but there's a modern edge with solid, up-to-date materials. Contemporary and classic at the same time." Roxanne was impressed with Tom's description, and also impressed with his knowledge. He gave her a tour around the building, pointing out ideas he came up with, both of them talking shop about construction and materials. Tom's eyes sparkled when he talked about the mechanical features of the building, and being a building site manager, it made Roxanne swoon. "Want a coffee?" Tom asked, pointing to one of the store fronts that housed a coffee shop. "Only if you let me pay," said Roxanne. Tom acquiesced and held the door open for Roxanne to enter. She pulled out her credit card from her purse to pay for their cappuccinos, and then they sat down at a little table outside. Her phone dinged. "What was that?" Tom asked. "Oh, I just get purchase alerts for every credit card transaction I make. It's just so I can keep track," she said. She took a sip from her cup. "I didn't think one of your projects would be so modest. I just thought you did big buildings," Roxanne said. Tom nodded. "Yeah, that's my folks," he said. "I wanted to create a community. It's definitely cool." Roxanne looked across the table at Tom. He appeared more relaxed in that environment, certainly not as rigid and stiff as he was at the bar. The sun started to set in the horizon, casting a glow on their faces. "Hey Tom," said a kid about 12 who was walking by. "How ya all doin'?" he asked, giving Tom a slap and then backward slap on the hand as a kind of greeting. "I'm good," Tom smiled. "How you been, Dave?" "Good, just got an A in math." Tom smiled and nodded. "Who's the girl?" Dave asked, making googly eyes at Tom. "Sorry, yes, this is Roxanne." Roxanne reached out her hand to shake, but Dave slapped it and backward slapped it like he had done with Tom. "Nice to meet you," said Roxanne. "She's quite the lady," Dave nodded. "I better get going, gotta get something for my mother. I'll tell her you said hi." "Please do," Tom responded. "Anything you need?" "Nah, that's okay. We good." "Nice to see you," Dave said and continued his walk. "Nice kid," said Roxanne, nodding her approval. "I made sure the apartments were affordable. Dave's mom didn't have the best credit, but I got to know her. Gave her a chance. She works hard," Tom said. Roxanne looked at Tom in a new way. She never thought he acted snobby, but seeing a generous, easygoing side of him aroused her. "I can see you're really great with kids," Roxanne continued to lay on the compliments. Tom shrugged. "About that." A clouded look shadowed his face. "I don't want to put any pressure on you about the pregnancy." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I promise to sort out that permit issue." "I will, you don't have to." Roxanne wasn't sure how to respond. She thought about revealing to Tom that she had already submitted the permit with a forged signature, but she didn't want to sour how well things were going between them. Who knew that actually falling for each other would be the thing that put baby making on hold? "It's okay," she said. She fumbled with her purse that was hanging across her shoulder, feeling unsure how to answer Tom. She didn't know if he meant he didn't want to sleep with her, or if he meant he didn't want to inseminate her. "I just think it's better if we wait." "Now I see I shouldn't have rushed anything," Tom said. "But what about Ruby's land?" Roxanne's phone buzzed in her purse, and she took it out to look at the call. She saw it was from her father and left it go to voicemail, leaving the phone sitting on the table between them. "I know Ruby's father left a secret provision that the land be sold to a family man. I can either convince Ruby that will be me someday in the future, or I'll just have to give it up." "Tom, no." Roxanne looked concerned. I see what you've done here. I know you can develop something great. I'll help you however you want with Ruby. We can convince her. She grabbed his hand and nodded confidently. He smirked nervously in return. By the time they were nearly finished with their cappuccinos, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The stores were closed, and with no one else around, Tom and Roxanne sat in the darkening evening, enjoying each other's company. What occurred next happened in quick succession so fast Roxanne and Tom didn't have a chance to react. A gray van drove up to a parking space near the sidewalk. Two men in ski masks jumped out of the back of the van. Each man grabbed Roxanne under one armpit and carried her into the van. She tried to pull away and kick, but to no avail. They were too fast for Tom to react. Once Tom realized what was happening, Roxanne was halfway to the van. He tried to chase the van and read the license plate, but they had covered it with something. He turned back toward the table they'd been sitting at, stunned. Some men had kidnapped Roxanne, and he needed to get her back. He couldn't fathom that one minute she'd been sitting there and the next, it seemed like she vanished. The only trace of her was her phone which sat on the table. She couldn't even call for help. Chapter 19 Pizza Ping. Roxanne, sitting in the back of a van that smelled like sweaty gym clothes, with her hands tied behind her back, she felt flustered. Unlike Tom, they hadn't blindfolded her. She looked around for any details that might tell her who had taken her. Falling over a little to the left, Roxanne could tell the van was banking a turn. "What do you want?" she asked. She craned her neck to see the two men who snatched her on the seat in front of her. "Shut up," one of the men said. She could only see the backs of their heads, yet she could tell they bore big muscles. Her purse, still draped across her chest, wasn't much use. Roxanne realized she'd left her phone on the table at the coffee shop. Tom probably took it, she thought, but she probably wouldn't get a chance to call it. "You won't get away with this, you know. If it's money you want, I can help you." "Shut up," one of the men said again. As the van careened off another turn, Roxanne considered where they were taking her. Thanks to Tom's blindfold, she hadn't even been exactly sure where she'd been. Sitting on the floor of the van, she couldn't even see much out the windows. After another few minutes, the van stopped. Roxanne could make out the outline of tall buildings, but she didn't recognize any of them. The two men hopped in the back, blindfolded and gagged Roxanne. Then they took off her shoes and tied her ankles together. She started to fear they might throw her in the Mississippi River, bound and gagged, but based on what she saw out the window, she suspected she was closer to downtown. She pulled at the restraints on her wrists. They wouldn't loosen. She heard them wheeling something to the van, then, one of the men lifted her body under her armpits, while the other grabbed her legs. She tried to squirm, however, it didn't do much good. They plopped her body on something soft and covered her with some other kind of fabric towel, she thought, because they smelled like bleach. They wheeled her into a building, and she could hear the ding and characteristic rumbling of elevator doors open. An apartment or a hotel. She couldn't be sure which. She lay still, listening to her surroundings rather than trying to fight. She knew she couldn't do much blindfolded with her arms and legs tied. When she heard the sound of a keycard slicing through the reader in the door, she knew it must be a hotel room. Despite her feelings of panic and utter uselessness, she forced herself to remain calm, gather all the information she could. They wheeled her inside, unbarred her, placed her on the bed and removed the gag, the blindfold, and the ties on her ankles so only her hands remained tied together. She recognized the two goons from Owen's funeral, sitting in back of the church. They'd been following her, probably tracking her movements. As she adjusted her focus, she could see another man, short and bald, sitting in an armchair in the corner of the room. The goons led her over to the corner, pulled out the desk chair, and plopped her on it in front of the bald man. She didn't recognize him. "What do you want?" she spat. "Easy," said the man. "It's not so much what you have that I want. It's what I can get for you." A little relieved that the men wanted to keep her alive, Roxanne pulled on her wrist ties, wriggling to free her hands. "Behave and I'll untie you," the man said. "So you've been following me. I get it. But what's the problem?" "The way I see it," the man continued, "you've been cozying up to someone with a lot of money." Tom, she thought. They were after Tom's money. "And with your substantial debt, what I can't understand is why you don't use some of your boy toys' money to take care of that." The bald man flashed a grin that made Roxanne's arm hair stand on edge. "It's not like that. I can't just take his money." "We'll see about that," the man said. "We had an agreement." "I'm paying back the money," Roxanne said, assuming the goons and the bald man had been sent by her father's loan shark. The man clasped his hands and pulled them in front of him, stretching his shoulders, indicating his boredom with the situation. "Yes, but not fast enough." When the boss sees another way, a faster way, he doesn't hesitate to take the opportunity. But we had a deal, Roxanne protested, angered that they would suddenly involve Tom. The bald man stood up from his chair and sauntered over to Roxanne. She followed his slow, deliberate movements with her eyes, not moving her head. He brought his hand to her face and stroked it. Roxanne snarled. Oh honey, the moment you failed to secure the proper permit, the deal was off. She reeled from that information. How did they know? What was going on? Now we wait, he said and hopped on the bed, outstretching his legs and laying back on the bulging white pillows with his hands clasped behind his head. One of the other men picked up the remote and turned on the TV. He circled through the channels before landing on a superhero movie. The other man came over to Roxanne and turned her chair to face the TV. She grimaced. What do you want me to do? I don't have my phone. Give me yours. I'll call Tom. I'll ask for the money. The man on the bed looked over at her. He smiled like an evil genius. We're not that stupid, he said. The boss just said to wait. That's what we do. Roxanne sat in the chair and seethed. She could try to run, but with three of them they'd surely catch her. She eyed the phone on the bedside table. They'd unplugged it. She'd have to first plug it in and then make a call, which probably wasn't going to be possible under their watchful eyes. One of the goons stepped over to the mini-fridge, took out a beer can and opened it. When he padded back to the bed, Roxanne could see the logo against the shimmery silver of the can. A green shamrock. It was the same logo she found on the piece of aluminum at the burnt-down building. Why did they have a beer with that logo? They clearly brought it to the room. How did it all add up? She couldn't figure out how they knew so much. Did this mean that construction was going to be delayed? Who else knew about the permit? Her anxiety prevented her from thinking straight. She knew Tom would probably pay the money, but she wanted to stop that before it happened. She couldn't let him get entangled in this mess. And who knew how much they'd demand from him? If only she could get a message to Tom, she thought. Or maybe a hotel employee. I'm hungry, she said, breaking the silence that hung thick in the room. The man in charge looked at his thugs on the bed. One of them shrugged. Room service, he suggested. No, then they'd have to come in and it'd be on the charge. Too messy, said the bald guy. And boss said not to drive the van anywhere, one of the other men said. The other thug added. I could go for some pizza. I could meet the delivery guy outside. Both goons nodded to each other in agreement. Then they dug in their pockets. How much you got? One goon asked the other. $5, said one. I only got 2. Not enough. You guys are idiots, said the bald guy, as he turned back to the TV screen engrossed in the movie. But I'm hungry, one goon whined. We didn't bring a wallet. No ID like boss said. That gave Roxanne an idea. Pizza sounds good, she said. I'll buy. My credit card's in my wallet. The two thugs glanced at each other and agreed it sounded like a good idea. The bald man on the other bed gave them the go-ahead with a wave of his arm as he continued to stare at the screen. They took the card from her wallet and used one of their cell phones to place the order. Roxanne sat back, hoping her plan would work. In a minute or two she hoped Tom would hear the ping. Chapter 20. Rescue Mission. Meanwhile, Tom had grabbed Roxanne's phone on the table. Seeing her lipstick-stained cup of cappuccino sitting there, he sliced the cups off the table in anger. He knew going to the police could be dangerous, especially with the type of people Roxanne's father was involved with. No, he decided to go straight to the source. Plus, if anyone was following him, they wouldn't expect his next location. Not wanting to use his car, he ordered a ride share. Because he knew the building so well, he could identify the best place to hide until the car arrived. When he reached his destination, Tom stormed up to the door and knocked. Coming, a friendly voice called, and Tom waited. Roxanne's father opened the door and Tom barged in. They took Roxanne, he said, hurrying into the living room, pacing back and forth. His normal erect posture looked bent and wounded. Took her? Where? Who? Her father asked. You know. You must know. It's all because of your gambling. They just took her. He reached out his arms, widening his eyes. Slow down. Someone took her. Roxanne's father closed the door and walked back to the couch. You don't seem upset. What's wrong with you? Tom stared at him. I can see you're agitated. Roxanne's father fluttered his hands to try to calm down Tom. I need to know what happened first. Tom breathed out a long breath and plopped on the couch. We were having coffee at this place, my first building project, near the city line. And these two men just jumped out of a van and snatched her. It was so fast. I couldn't react. They covered the license plate. Tom dropped his head in his hands, then clenched his fists around the back of his hair. Why would they do that? I thought she had everything handled? She told me. She did. Well, she thought she did. Tom looked remorseful, almost ashamed. There was one snafu. I was helping her with it. I guess I didn't get to it in time. What snafu? Never mind, Tom snapped, raising his head, leaving behind his feelings of regret and focusing on their predicament. We need to find her. I figured going to the police wasn't the right move. Where do these guys hang out? How can we get in touch with them? You don't, Roxanne's father said. But if I had to. You can't. Roxanne's father hobbled to the kitchen, where he picked up a piece of paper from a little desk and shuffled back to the living room. He handed Tom the piece of paper with a note scribbled on it. Every time they had a message for me, it came through Owen. I'd write it down. Like this, he said. Tom pressed his head onto the back of the couch in frustration. Owen was a dead end. The police would complicate things. Maybe Danny, Roxanne's boss, would know something? Taking Roxanne's phone out of his pocket, he said. Maybe they called her. Maybe they sent her a message. He started to scroll through her most recent messages, then her contacts, hoping to find the information he needed, but he didn't really know what he was looking for. Here, you do it. See if there are any contacts you don't recognize. Tom handed the phone to her father. As he was clicking through, Tom heard a ping. Roxanne's father jumped a little at the sound. What was that? Tom grabbed the phone out of his hand. Tom sprung to his feet and beamed. Yes, he said. Purchase alert. Good girl, Roxanne. He turned to Roxanne's father. I got a ride here, can you drive? Oh, okay, her dad said. Tom held the phone like a winning lottery ticket. Because of the purchase alert, he could see that Roxanne bought a pizza from Antonio's near downtown Memphis. In the car with Roxanne's father, Tom adjusted the seat for his long legs. He spit out directions, urging her dad to drive faster. Tom knew Roxanne probably wasn't at the pizza place, but he may be able to find out about Roxanne's location. They sped along the highway with Tom anxious and ready to jump out. At Antonio's, Tom bolted inside and showed the person behind the cash register the purchase alert on the phone. Tom slipped a $100 bill across the counter and asked for the location and phone number for the order. The employee looked sideways to make sure no one was looking, slipped the bill into a pocket of his apron, and gave Tom the information. Tom hopped back into the car and said in haste, "The P Hotel," to Roxanne's father, who slammed on the gas. Now that Tom had some information, he had to figure out what room she was in. He hadn't taken the pizza, instead leaving that to the delivery person. Someone had to come to the lobby to retrieve it, and Tom knew it wouldn't be Roxanne. He didn't want anything to tip off the kidnappers that he was on their trail. How could he figure out what room she was in, much less what floor she was on? He thought about Roxanne and her funny disguise at the airport. When she was trapped, she used what was available to her. Roxanne's father pulled up to the hotel's entrance. Before Tom could skedaddle from the car, Roxanne's father grabbed Tom's arm. He popped open the glove compartment where a small revolver rested. "Take it," he told Tom. Tom hesitated, then shoved the gun in his waistband in the back of his pants, his coat hiding its bulge. "Go get my girl." Inside, a large crowd gathered around a fountain where several ducks swam in the water. The hotel was famous for its ducks, which marched to and from the fountain to the elevator every day. It was a show that the hotel capitalized on, welcoming tourists to its lobby twice daily for the festivities. With such a big crowd, it was easy for Tom to blend in. He knew the kidnappers would recognize him. He needed a disguise, and he thought about Roxanne. He spied a luggage cart holding a few suitcases, a man's hat and trench coat. People were too busy watching the ducks that no one noticed Tom put on the hat and coat. He slipped the gun from his pants into an inside pocket on the coat. He stood around the corner from the elevator, waiting and watching everyone who stepped off, looking for the possible kidnapper. A few minutes later, the pizza delivery person entered the lobby. He dialed his phone, said a few words to the person on the other end, and waited. 2 more elevator doors opened before the kidnapper, who Tom recognized, stepped out. The duck show was wrapping up, and the duck master, with his line of ducks, were waddling toward the elevator bays. Tom had to act quickly. He waited until the kidnapper paid for the pizza and stepped back on the elevator. Making sure the kidnapper was the only one in the elevator, Tom thrust his arm between the doors at the last second and kept his head down. The kidnapper looked up, probably seeing the commotion behind Tom, and didn't register Tom's face as he glanced at the floor number the kidnapper had pressed. Then Tom stepped back to let the doors close. With a trail of ducks behind him, Tom decided to take the stairs. The kidnapper had pressed floor 8. If Tom hurried, he might be able to catch up to him. He sprinted up the stairs floor after floor, starting to huff around the 4th floor, his thoughts of Roxanne propelling him. On the 8th floor he peered around the corner. He didn't see anyone. He heard the sound of a door closing in the hallway to the right, and he took in a deep breath to try to follow the smell of pepperoni. Tom stood near the end of the hallway listening. Which one? Should he knock? He dialed the number the pizza cashier had given him using a call masking app and listened. He could vaguely make out a phone ringing behind 825. Taking the gun out and aiming at the door, Tom prepared to save his girl.